tell you about the next session, the last session of the Junior Kolkata Literary Meet 2020. It's a conversation between Mr. Ruskin Bond and Neha Hiranandani, but I'll still say a few lines about him. He's an award-winning Indian author of British descent, much renowned for his role in promoting children's literature in India. He has written over 500 short stories, essays, and novellas, and more than 50 books for children. His first novel, The Room on the Roof, written at 17, received the John Lewin Rees Memorial Prize in 1957. His latest work, The Little Book of Comfort, will be available from January. He has received the Sahitya Academy Award, the Padma Shri, the Padma Bhushan, the Sahitya Academy's Bal Sahitya Puraskar, and we are so happy that he's back with us. He'll be in conversation with Neha Hiranandani, who's a writer whose columns have appeared in the Indian Express, Huffington Post, NDTV, and Vogue, among others. She holds degrees in literature and education from Wellesley College and Harvard University. Her first book, Girl Power, was published by Scholastic India, and her forthcoming book will be published by Penguin Random House in 2020. I'd request Mr. Bond and Neha to please come up on stage. And maybe you want to move up.
Can we have our mics on? There we are. Good afternoon, everyone. And look who we have here today. Just for Kolkata, he's come in very late last evening. 1 o'clock in the morning, apparently, is when you landed in this.
Yes, that's why I look like a question mark today. I think after sitting here and talking to you, I'll feel like an exclamation mark, I'm sure. Thank you.
So there we are. Welcome. Welcome to Kolkata, Mr. Bond. And it's absolutely wonderful to have you here. So let's chat a little bit, and then we'll open it up. I know there's lots of eager questions in the audience, so we'll open it up very, very soon. So let's start off with reading. Actually, this is apparently a session for readers about reading. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into reading? Were you one of those children that always had your nose in a book at the dining table?
Well, not really. I didn't really start any earlier than other kids. I think, in those days, books were not always easy to come by. We didn't have that many bookshops or libraries. So at a very early age, I'd have to really depend on the books I found either in my grandmother's house or stepfather's house, and sometimes they weren't very interesting. But probably I think the first book I read was a big book of nursery rhymes, and followed by Alice in Wonderland. And gradually I got into reading and a little bit of writing, and that's how it's gone on all my life, in fact.
And how has your reading taste evolved over the years? I know you were a A.A. Milne fan at some point, known, of course, known for his Winnie the Pooh series, but he wrote much more than that.
Yes, so I read everything. Right from the beginning, I read the classics, I read comics, I read detective stories, crime fiction. Now I enjoy reading biography and history. Actually, practically anything except very long, fat novels, which I have difficulty getting through. So I read for pleasure. I write for pleasure too. Writing is fun, and that's what it should be.
Speaking of writing, can you Can you take us back to when the writing bug perhaps first bit you? I remember hearing a story about when you were a boy in your boyhood in Delhi, and you were living with your father at the time during the Second World War, and he was in the Air Force, and you were left largely to your own devices.
That's true, and for long hours I was alone, and sometimes I would just make lists. I'd make lists of books I'd enjoyed, films I'd seen, songs I liked. I was a great one for lists. Friends I had, which weren't many in those days, because you didn't, until I went to a boarding school, I didn't make many friends. But, you know, now I keep meeting young people like you who are actually interested in writing and want to write. And this was very rare when I was a boy. It wasn't fashionable then. And I think I was the only boy in my school, which was a big school with a very good library. But I was the only boy who was really interested in wanting to be a writer. And I remember coming home when I'd finished school, 1950. I'd done my senior KMA of something like the class 11 that you have today. And my mother said, well, Ruskin, now what are you going to do with yourself? And I said, Mom, I'm going to be a writer. And she said, don't be silly, go and join the army. And in those days, actually most of the boys did go into the army. You didn't have the choice of professions that you have today. But if I'd gone into the army, there'd probably have been another Beetle Bailey in the ranks. And the army, I think, was certainly better off without me. So I stuck to my ambition to be a writer. And from 1951, when I was 16, till today, when I'm 86, I have been writing stories all my life.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I mean, the perseverance, the tenacity, and clearly it's what you love best. It's what you love best, right?
That's true. And it's because I enjoy it. I love writing. It's fun, and that's how it should be. Otherwise, you could perhaps, you know, in a way, just get a bit bored with yourself. Not every writer goes through an entire lifetime writing books and stories and articles and essays, but because perhaps it can become a bit tedious. But I've been very fortunate in that I've made a living doing the thing that I enjoy most, and that's not something that's perhaps easy to achieve.
With all the books that you've written, is there one that's particularly close to your heart?
Well, it's always difficult to have a favorite, but perhaps the first, yeah, maybe very often the first, The Room on the Roof, which I wrote when I was 17, 18, is still very close to my heart. It's full of mistakes, but I've never corrected my mistakes.
Really?
No, because it should reflect me as I was when I wrote it, a 17-year-old. So if it's a bit immature or naive in parts, and I look at it now and said, my goodness, I was obsessed with semicolons. I used to use semicolons a lot. And so I've never touched it up or tried to edit it or change it in any way, because it represents the author when he was 17. It's about a 17-year-old by a 17-year-old. So be yourself when you write, and that, in a way, gives it a certain freshness and and makes it different.
And can you tell us about the first time that you saw one of your books in a bookstore?
Well, in the early days, my books didn't sell very well at all. It was hard to find them. And like any young author, I'd go into a bookshop. You didn't have online in those days. I'd go into a bookshop and see if they had my book there. And I went into this small shop in Connaught Place in Delhi and looked around, and then right under a pile of bestsellers, you know, by Harold Robbins and others, I spotted my book. So I looked around. Was the the shopkeeper looking? He didn't seem to be. So I pulled it out from underneath and put it on top so that people could see it. But he'd spotted me, the owner of the bookshop. So he didn't know I was the author. So anyway, he came along, picked it up, looked at it, said, "Ye nahi chalta. Nobody's buying this," and he put it back under the heap. So to teach him a lesson, I bought the book myself. So in those days, poor authors had to buy their own books sometimes.
And that was probably the last book that you bought of yourself, because they've been sold out ever since.
Well, I'm very fortunate that at least today there are young people like you and your teachers and parents who keep me going by reading my stories and books and buying them sometimes too. And it's really most of my life. It's been perhaps the only way in which I've earned a living with my pen. And I say pen because I still write by hand and I still use a pen, a ballpoint pen. Many years ago I used to type, but it became more and more uncomfortable typing. So I just write by hand now, and my publishers are very tolerant. They'll take my handwritten manuscript, which I admit my handwriting isn't too bad either. So while the world goes on moving forward, technologically speaking, I keep moving backwards and still and survive in a way.
That's wonderful. Speaking of your writing style, now we know that you write in pen, but tell me, do you, say you're writing about a railway station perhaps, do you see all of it in your mind, the train and the passengers, and is it all sort of fully formed in your mind before it comes out on paper?
That's very true. You're quite right. I'm often asked how I write my stories, and do I, say, suffer from writer's block, or do I falter going through? But I would, before I sit down to write a story, I would have visualized it, like a film in a way. I would see the beginning, the middle, the end, the characters. I would listen to them, what they're saying. So I've actually written it in my head. So then it's only a matter of putting it down on paper and using good words and sentences and, and making it readable. But the story has already been written. And so for that, I think you need to have a sort of visual mind, an imagination where you can see the events unfold, as you would with a film, and then be able to, in a way, transfer it into good language.
That's interesting, and I think that's an excellent tip for those of us who quite often suffer from writer's block, is to sit back, perhaps take a walk, visualize.
Yes, I'm often asked this question as, what do you do when you get writer's block? And so I say I seldom get it, because I have already written the story in my head. But if you do get writer's block, as you might do when you're doing an examination or writing an essay or answering a question paper, there, of course, you can't put it aside and come back to it 2 or 3 days later as a writer might.
If only, yes.
So I sympathize with you. And of course, the final solution for a writer who's got stuck in the middle of something and can't get on with it is to use the waste paper basket. Nothing is sacred after all.
Now, as someone who's been reading your work for so many years, and I think all of us in this audience have, we've grown up reading your work, I think it's fair to say that your writing style has changed over the years. The earlier pieces seem to be almost more melancholic,
Yes,
and now
yes.
of late they seem to be a bit more cheerful.
When
What's
I was-
brought on this cheer?
Thank you. Well, when I was in my 20s and often falling in love with girls who never returned my affections, naturally my love stories had sad endings. At your age, I took myself very seriously. And now as I get older, life seems to get funnier and more ridiculous. So perhaps there's more humor in my writing now. And life, I find, is quite funny. And when I write about myself, I see sometimes how ridiculous I can be and how funny my friends and relatives are. When I want to write a funny story, I think of uncles and aunts who are far away and can't get at me.
And do you ever tell them that it's them that you're writing about?
No, people don't recognize themselves. They don't. It's amazing. You can write about someone quite accurately, but he or she won't recognize themselves. It can't be like that. So feel safe. You write about your aunts and uncles and cousins and relatives. They won't recognize themselves.
Especially the very flawed ones, right?
And when I run out of relatives, see, I never run out of stories to write because I can always cook up a ghost story. And I've written dozens of ghost stories without ever having met or seen a ghost. Our previous speaker was here. He was just telling me how whenever he goes to a hill station, and he's scared of living in hotel rooms there because he remembers having read certain ghost stories of mine, which may make him nervous about being on his own up in the hills. So I've told him next time, don't be afraid. There are no ghosts around. I just make them all up.
You tell us now. You tell us now, after ruining many a hill station for many of us, while we were sort of...
Some people like to meet ghosts. There's this, I think, the Savoy Hotel in Missouri, I think, gives you a reduction or a discount on your bill if you happen to see the ghost.
Now, as someone who's written so many books over the years, and has really an enviable breadth of work. Now, is there a story that you're still waiting to write?
Oh gosh, yes.
There's many publishers in the audience who'd be very excited to hear this answer.
Yeah, there are always stories waiting to be written. You see, and also the older you get, in a way, the more you have to write about because life is stretched out behind you. So many years, you've met so many people, seen so much happening. So many interesting events that you can't run out of subjects. And if you're interested in people, you won't run out of material either because, after all, people are stories. Everyone has a story to tell. And you've all got interesting lives. And even if you wrote only one book, it would be an interesting book.
Can you... shifting the tempo a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to live, for example, in Missouri? And it continues to, now of course it is home, and I suspect it forever shall be. And what is it like living a bit cut off?
Well, I moved to the hills, to Missouri in 1963, 64. Before that I was living in Delhi. And I lived in Delhi 3 or 4 years and briefly had a job there. But somehow I just couldn't get used to city life. And I wasn't writing anything very useful or good at the time. So I thought I needed a change, and I thought a complete change and go and try and live in the hills instead. And I did so, and it made a great difference. It did. I think the environment does help you as a writer. It isn't absolutely necessary because if you're a real writer or true writer, you should be able to write anywhere, even if you're living in a slum. But nevertheless, if your surroundings are pleasant and you're happy and you're close to nature, as in my case, I became close to nature living up in the mountains, that helped me in my writing. And it was a great change from city life. Because somehow New Delhi as a capital city, it didn't have much character in it then. I'm talking about the 1960s. It may be more interesting now. Well, it probably is more interesting now.
Marginally, but yes.
But so living, and I took a cottage out in the, well outside the hill station at the time, very close to the forest. So I became familiar with the trees, with the mountain stream running by, birds, flowers, and all this came into my essays stories, books, and still does.
And nature very much is a character.
That's true, very much. I'm not just, even when I don't go out into the woods, I'm close to nature in a way. You have to have a window, of course. I think every writer needs a window. Not just every writer. Every person needs a window. You need a window to look out upon the world, at everything that's happening outside you, also at trees and anything that's beautiful. I've even lived with a window, I remember, in London, which overlooked a cemetery.
Ghost stories, is that where it all started?
That's true, ghost stories. Well, I think the only ghost that I can say was a real one is the ghost that tucks me up at night. I sleep very restlessly. My Resign blanket keeps falling off, and I'm aware of somebody picking it up and tucking me in. And when I put on the light, there's nobody there. So it's a very motherly sort of ghost who takes care of me. And most of my ghosts are friendly and helpful. You know, they're not out to scare you. After ghosts are people who have passed on and just want to come back and look at the world they've lived in before and maybe meet a few friends and family. So don't think of ghosts as creatures who are going to terrify you. They're probably more terrified of you.
Before we open it up to the audience, and I know there'll be many questions, would you like to share, since we've got such a wonderful young audience with us this afternoon, would you like to share a ghost story perhaps, or a limerick if you can remember one?
Limericks. Well, there's one that was written about me. There was an old man in Landor who wanted young folk to laugh more. So he wrote them a book, and with laughter they shook as they rolled down the road to Rajpur.
Oh, excellent. That's wonderful. Thank you.
And to improve my language as a
Yes.
boy, I would learn and recite tongue twisters, such as what's the Peter Piper? Was it? Yeah, I can still do it. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. A peck of pickled pepper did Peter Piper pick. Now, if Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper, then where's the peck of pickled pepper that Peter Piper picked? So
That was brilliant.
So all this helps you in your language, actually.
So that's why you're a national treasure, because of the Peter. That's excellent. International treasure, says our audience. Thank you. I'll open it up to the audience, so start getting your questions ready. But I have one last question. I was reading one of your interviews, and you said, look, I've been privileged to lead a life with no regrets. But tell me this, Mr. Bond, if you had to do it all over again, would you do it as Ruskin Bond or James Bond?
Certainly as Ruskin Bond. James Bond couldn't spell even. But I had an uncle called James Bond, and a real uncle, but he wasn't a secret agent. He was a dentist. And I wrote an epitaph for him for his grave in Simla. And the epitaph goes, stranger approach this spot with gravity. James Bond is filling his last cavity. That was my uncle, the dentist uncle, James Bond.
I'm sure he'll be rolling in his grave after reading that one. But thank you.
But I get confused with other people. Only at the airport yesterday, a gentleman came up to me and said, sir, I enjoyed your reading your great classic, Unto This Last. Now, Unto This Last was a book written by John Ruskin 200 years ago. So I said, sir, I'm not that old, I'm very sorry. Unto This Last used to be read by Mahatma Gandhi, as he tells us. And somebody else came and asked me, so when are you going to do another Mowgli story for us? Huh? So I get confused sometimes with with other authors.
Not for us, sir. Not for us. There's only one Bond, and his name is Ruskin Bond. So there we are. Thank you. And I think we'll open it up to the audience now.
I believe somebody in the audience wrote a story called Biryani with Bond.
Yes. Yes, we had someone come up to us a few minutes ago. I think you'd had biryani with this young boy a few years ago, and he wrote a story on it.
That's when I broke my tooth. I think the biryani was a bit tough.
Oh, wonderful. I think we've got microphones. So if you can just find a microphone and please tell us your name.
Hello, sir. I'm Shamik Datta. I'm a 20-year-old college student, but still, whenever I feel low, I come back to your books because they have such a warm feeling about them. So my question to you is, how do you convey such deep emotions with such simple language?
Thank you for your appreciation. And it's not something deliberate or something that or artificial. I guess it's just, I write according to my nature, in a way. I think you get two kinds of writers, the subjective writer or born writer, and the writer who's maybe made himself or learned to become one. And I think it's something part of my nature that I'll bring out in my writing without trying any, artificial effects or use of bombastic language. So I just try to be myself when I write, and maybe that's what helps. Thank you.
I think we've got another question there.
Good morning, sir. My name is Divya Malpani, and I have written a poem which I want to recite.
Please do. Where is he?
You're right there, in the middle.
Nature's wrath. Though flaming walls will lick whatever blocks thy path, they'll not stop for a single moment, so great is thy wrath. All over on this planet wide, how do these massive bushfires start? For there are animals lying dead when these dreadful fires part. A question bounces in my head. My mind gets pained by stress. Day in and out, the question swirls. Who is to blame for all this mess? It's us, we humans, who have caused these scars. Do we think about nature when we go about in cars? Have we thought about it? Well, think again. Some people are trying, but alas in vain. Animals get endangered. Some just go extinct. Their habitats get reduced to ashes in this terrible conflict. Nature has bore with us. She'll not take it anymore. One toe out of line and she'll check the flow.
Very good. Very good. A poem with a message. And we're all conscious nowadays of the damage being done to the environment by ourselves, in a way. And I hope you'll write more poems. That was very well written.
That was excellent. That was excellent. Thank you for having the courage, actually. It's not easy to read out one's work.
That's true.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, I decided last year also.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. Well, you got to keep writing more poems.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we've got some girls in the front who'd like to ask a question. Maybe we can...
Hello, sir. My name is Ritimukta Pal. I'm a student from Patobabun, class 8. So, when I started in my life reading the English big stories, I started with your books. So, for me, and I think for many students in India, you are a person of inspiration. So, my question is that who are the person of inspiration of yours?
It's a good question.
Yes.
I should have thought of that. Thank you for asking it.
And I'm very flattered that you started your reading with one of my books. The book that probably influenced me most was when I was about 11, and I read David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. And in it, this young boy, David, grows up and becomes a writer. And on the way, he also runs away from home. So I decided I'd emulate him, and I did run away from home too, but came back pretty soon because I didn't take much pocket money with me. But I did, it was one of the books that influenced me a great deal. And with most writers, even if they don't admit it, I think practically any writer who's worth his or her salt would acknowledge that they have been influenced as boys or girls by the books they've read or the books they've really enjoyed most. Huh? So I think to become a writer, you've got to be a reader first.
Right. I think we have a few more questions in the front here, and then we can move on to the back. Oh, there we are. Okay.
It's nice sitting here in the,
In the cool breeze?
part sun. I was up in Missouri, very severe winter. It's been snowing there heavily. And so I'm really feeling relaxed now in Kolkata. And you won't get rid of me very easily. I'll hang on a few days.
We don't
here.
plan to.
Hello, sir. Who's your favorite author?
Who was your favorite?
No particular favorite. Over the years, favorites come and go, and so many. I could make one of my lists of 100 favorite authors. So, but they go down over the years. From the ones that you read, I think, as a boy and growing up, are the ones that you probably remember the best and the ones that influence you the most.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. So we've got the mic going.
So, what is your favorite book? What is your favorite book?
Favorite book, sir?
My favorite book, well, I mentioned David Copperfield. I also there's so many favorites. There was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, a very powerful, passionate novel. Then short stories. I've always enjoyed short story writers, from Somerset Maugham, Maupassant, and O. Henry and Saki. There's, and you have writers like Satyajit Ray and others, who also mastered the short story.
So I think we have time for 2 more questions. Let's take it from one boy and one girl, and I think we'll have to wrap up our session.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good afternoon, sir. I had 2 dreams, and one turned last year when you read my story as a part of the Young Ruskin Bond contest, and I came first in that. Another dream comes true today when I get a chance to speak to you. And my question is, in your book you say, I am afraid science and politics have let us down. Why do you say this, and how do you suggest us, the Generation Z, to act against this backdrop and use reading as a tool?
I think when I said science and politics have let us down, I was thinking in terms of over the years how science has had the opportunity to do far more good than it has done. But at the same time, scientists have come under the influence of politicians worldwide over the years to make atom bombs or weapons of destruction, when all that scientific know-how could have gone into something more helpful to the human race. So I sort of linked the scientists and the politicians together. Because even if you look into the history of the creation of the atom bomb and the hydrogen bomb back in the 50s, you can see how those particular scientists were exploited and molded by the politicians of that period. So it's maybe a generalization and unfair to scientists in a way, because so many of them are not making bombs. But it was a generalization, you could say.
I think last question to the girl in the front, and then we'll have to wrap up our session. I'm
Hi,
afraid.
sir. I'm Srishti. Now, we are so proud that we have got such an amazing writer like you in India. But it's just a question that if you were not a writer, what you would like to be?
Well, my ambitions were very limited, thank you. And I've often told people how I wanted to be a tap dancer, but don't have the figure for it now.
Oh, come now.
Well, I might have, but the other ambition for which perhaps I do have a figure was to be a sumo wrestler. But still, I think I made the best choice in taking up writing, because at 85, I could still write stories. But tap dancing, wrestling, playing football, I also wanted to be a football player. But and I can still kick a football some distance, but I'm not going to run after it. So there's a difference there.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. And I think tap dancing and sumo wrestling are the poorer for it, but we have certainly gained as a community of readers. And thank you, Mr. Bond, for all that you continue to do.
Thank you. And
You've been a wonderful audience, and thank you. And thank you for making the trip.
Thank you. And what's the name of your book?
Girl Power.
Girl Power. And this is the author of a book called Girl Power, which is a fascinating book about women who've done extraordinary things over the years.
Thank you. That was wonderful. You might be...
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Neha. Always a privilege to have you here.